Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar from the National Youth Agency. My name is Lee Middleton. I'm Chief Executive of the NYA. I'm joined today by my brilliant colleagues, Abby Malachi, our Director of Youth Work, and in the background, Laura and Alex are driving all the technology behind us and keeping us going. So welcome aboard. I'm going to talk you through some of the latest changes to the guidance as a result of the new and sort of strengthened tiered system. There are some little differences that we need to be aware of, and it's really important that we bring you all up to speed collectively. I know there's hundreds of you watching, and many will watch this after the event, so welcome all. The way we're going to run today, same as the previous webinars, we seem to have a good routine now. I will walk you through some slides and some key information, and then my colleague Abby is looking at all the questions that you've got. So in the YouTube Live, there's a chat section, so you can pop in your questions, you can say hello to each other, but you can also ask us questions. So if you've got a question that you're desperate to get answered and you're not sure about, go to that point, go into the chat, put in your question, Abby will go through. What we will do is draw out, we get hundreds of questions, so we will draw out all the themes and we will try and answer them within the hour that we've got. So I'm not going to take any more time, I'm just going to progress us on. So just to keep up to date, really, things change quite quickly, and as the guidance moves, so do we. It takes time to get through the information. All the channels that you can see on the screen here will show you how to engage with us, keep up to speed. The NYA network there is the really key one. That will get you in newsletter dropped straight to your inbox every time something changes. So it's really important that we do that. But you're on Twitter, YouTube, obviously, and other sources. You can follow us today on Twitter as well. Abby and I are both there. If you're a member of a national association, we say this every time, and I'm sorry if this gets a bit repetitive, but if you're a member of a national association within the youth sector, it's really important that you also take note of the guidance that those colleagues put out. So I know roughly timing joint announcements today around 1 o'clock today, the Scouts and Guides and maybe some others will also be putting out additional information. They may not, they may take a bit longer. The rules don't change till Wednesday, so there's a bit of time. But I know some of our colleagues in other organisations are looking at how they will provide you with additional information to support you as things change, and things do change. So you need to be following your national association's guidance. If you don't have a national association, then you follow the NYA's. All the work of those associations follows our guidance in full, and it's important that you take full note of that. There are only a few of them shown here on the screen. There are many other national organisations out there supporting youth sector that work with us. So yeah, there are many others than on here. Quick one, but the NYA's guidance only applies to England. We do not have jurisdiction in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. So what I'm going to talk you through today just applies to the regulations that have been laid down and are still going through the process of Parliament at the moment around England only. So just to highlight England only. So in the not too distant future, we will publish version 4 of our guidance. It's going to look exactly like this, a red and orange version, and that will give you an indication of what I'm about to talk you through. It's very important that when that does come out, you take stock of it, download it, read it in full, and pay close attention to it. Much of it remains very similar around group sizes and face coverings. All those things have not changed. However, how we operate as a sector has slightly amended. We hope to have this published by 5 p.m. today. We've written it, it's with the lawyers at the government to approve, and as soon as it comes back, we will then push it out to you guys and get it there. If that takes a little longer, it'll come out tomorrow. The rules don't actually kick in until Wednesday, but we will get it to you as soon as possible. So it's really important that you register on the NYA network and follow us on social media, because that way you'll know exactly when this drops. However, we are pretty clear, we know what's coming and what needs to change, and therefore we can talk you through that today, and you'll be able to look back through this video as it will be published on YouTube straight after today. So rest assured, although the document may not be quite there because we're waiting on the lawyers, this is there. Just a big thanks to colleagues at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, our home department, who work really closely with us. I'm pretty sure the civil servant who works with us day in, day out, and who's doing late night calls with us is on the line watching. So huge thanks to them. They're working behind the scenes to get the best package for young people. And it's a complex space because the rules are changing and they need different things in different parts of the country because of the new tiers. And we have to adapt and play along and play our part as part of that journey. So huge thanks to them. new guidance, version 4, will drop hopefully by 5 p.m. today, but if not, it'll certainly be out tomorrow. So key things that are coming from the Wednesday is there are different rules for under and over 18s. I'm going to go through this in separate slides that will break all this down, but essentially if you're under 18, we are moving back to what we were familiar with under Amber only a matter of 3 or 4 weeks ago. But if you're over 18, the rules have been tightened for all 18-year-olds and plus, and therefore we will be remaining at our current red allowances for over 18s. I will walk you through this, but it does have some key change. It has one major shift, which is around group sizes and how, the use of who can come and who can't at what point. So I'm going to take you through this, but the headline is, which is the reason the document is red and amber, is that we're amber for under 18s and we're going to be red for over 18s. We hope to have everybody in the same band, but that has not been possible. And I'll explain that as I go through. So under 18s, this should be fairly straightforward to us. So for under 18-year-olds, we are amber. We can do online delivery, virtual youth work, virtual youth sector activity is absolutely fine. You can do anything you like with anybody online, as long as it's safe, follows your safeguarding policies. And if you haven't got a digital youth work policy, we recommend getting one as well. Detached and outreach work is fine. We can go out and about and engage young people out and about in detached and outreach. That will also be permitted. Ooh. One-to-one support indoors for young people is acceptable under Amber, and open youth sessions are also acceptable under Amber. In our bubbles of 15, back to bubbles of 15, we can have multiple bubbles if our venue is large enough, but we're groups of 15 plus staff, plus care workers if necessary, or key workers if a young person, say, has SEND and needs a support worker. They will be in addition to the bubble of 15. The goal is to keep those bubbles as consistent as possible, but we're in this space now where we're back to this. Just to say, the rules for under and over 18s apply across all 3 tiers. So it doesn't matter which level your area is in, whether you're Cornwall in level 1 or Kent in level 3, or wherever you are around the country, the same applies across the whole of the youth sector. There is no difference to the guidance that we are publishing. So the same rules apply across all 3 tiers. That's just a really important point to get across. So just to recap, for our under 18s, in whatever tier your area is in, online delivery, detached and outreach, one-to-one support, and open group work. And open means they can drop in. They don't have to have, you don't have to class them as vulnerable. They don't have to have an invitation. Anybody can turn up, but you've got to put them in groups of 15, bubbles of 15, and we can continue to work with them. And that, again, is across all 3 areas. Young people can travel and things like that, and I'll cover that later on in the slides, so we'll come back to that. It gets a lot more complicated when we're coming to over 18s, and I know the majority of the youth sector probably works under 18, but for the most high, some of our most high need young people, over 18s are really important. So we've worked really closely. And the thing I just want to say here is what the government's trying to do with the sort of revised tiers compared to the first set is there was a lot of confusion about what adults could do, and you could do different things in different places at different times. And what they've tried to do across all sectors is to rationalize the rules so that it doesn't matter if you're in the arts sector, the youth sector, the sports sector, roughly the same ruling should apply across the piece. So there should be less confusion, it should be easier to comply with and follow those rules and be safer. And that is the goal. This is the reason we've not been able to negotiate the same package for under 18s as over 18s as originally had pre the second lockdown. This is because the government's taken a much harder line across all adults over and 18-year-olds. And also just to say, you are amber up to your 18th birthday. The day before your 18th birthday, you are still amber. The day after, when you're 18, you're now red. That's the way I would describe this. So it's, yes, just to be really clear. So when we're over 18s, the following apply. So online delivery to anybody is fine. We can work with all young people, vulnerable or not. As we'll come back to the definitions of vulnerable or not. Online virtual youth work is absolutely fine. We can work outdoors with young people is okay over 18. We can work one-to-one with young people indoors over 18. That's not a problem, as the same as before. But the key bit was, which we had before when we moved to red, was the delivery of support groups. And this phrase support groups is really important. The legislation will talk about we're allowed as a sector to get groups of young people over 18 together as a support group to provide that support in our work for them. But the key there is they need to be vulnerable young people, or you need to recognize them as vulnerable and they need to be invited to a session. They can't just turn up and drop in and engage with the youth sector. They need to be able to turn up to an invite-only, controlled support group of young people and engage. These are the same rules we've had for the last 3 or 4 weeks with the second lockdown. So, follow those. If you're pretty familiar with that now, it's the same application. The one change is that before, under the current lockdown arrangements, it was a support group of 15, and that 15 had to include your staff. What we have agreed with government is that staff are additional to your 15. So even in red, even for over 18s, it's your bubble of 15, your support group, your vulnerable young people, plus staff. That is also acceptable now. So it does mean we can have slightly more young people in the group because staff are additional to your original group. And that is a change from the current lockdown arrangements where, they weren't like that. Staff had to be part of the group of 15. That regulation has now changed. We're also still continuing with the one-to-one triage opportunity. So any young person over 18 can drop in to see you, to connect with you for the purposes of you assessing their needs about accessing a support group. So we don't want any young person ever to be excluded from accessing youth provision. And so for over 18s, you can provide a drop-in triage opportunity. You don't have to call it that, come up with a much better name, but it's what we're calling it. Any young person can just turn up, drop in perfectly legally and acceptably and talk to you. You can then say, yes, okay, I want to provide you with support, and you could come next Tuesday evening to a support group, and that will be absolutely fine. Whereas for under 18s, they can just turn up, they can just drop in at any time because we're back to the amber rules. So just a bit about our 18 plus support groups. We covered this last time round, but I think it's just useful to recap because it's not that complicated, but I just think it's be helpful to you. So targeted support group sessions are permitted indoors. They're also permitted outdoors, but must comply with those COVID secure guidance. So you need to follow our version of, it's actually version 4 of our guidance, but the rules are the same as version 3. So that's why it says there, but follow the rules around being a COVID secure venue, and you can provide targeted support indoors for young people. Attendees need to be formally invited. Now, we said before, you don't have to have a letter or anything. You can just tell them Tuesday, 7 o'clock, come along, you're welcome. But you need to be controlling that those young people are coming to you, and it's not a free for all. It's not just an open access session. We will continue to press for more access, and we will continue to ask for further exemptions, but that's not going to happen this week in terms of the changes for Wednesday. So invite your young people, identify your young people, invite them to fixed time sessions. They can be as long as you like. There's no length of time that a session needs to be. They can come to your location and they can engage in your activity. The key thing is this notion of vulnerable young people, that we are there to provide support to vulnerable young people over 18. There is no definition. We have stuck to this. We are not providing you with a definition because we trust you as local practitioners to know your young people the best. You know who needs support, how to support them, and you can identify who needs to come to your provision. We can't do that centrally. We've been asked a few times if we could publish a list, but actually we will always miss some young people's needs from that list. It's not possible to create a definitive list. So best thing is we trust you. You know your young people, your communities, their families, their networks best. You make the judgment about who should come, but you can invite those young people to come along as you see fit, and it is your local judgment, not anybody else's. It's not the schools, not children's services, it's yours. Support groups can take place if reasonably necessary. So I guess ultimately, if we don't need to be providing this service and it can hold, then it should do. That gets a bit, before when we had a 4-week lockdown, that was fine. Now it's running on a bit longer. That might change your thinking. That's absolutely fine. This is the purpose of this new guidance. So have a think. Do you need to provide your sessions? And if the answer is yes, then you're welcome to do so. Support group sessions can be indoors, in community facilities, and actually, in our groups of 2 to 15 young people. But now, I'm going to keep reiterating this is additional to staff. Staff are not included in that group. Actually, that slide is wrong. I need to change that. I do apologise. So groups 15 plus staff and volunteers. Providers should be, one bubble at a time in your venue. You should only ideally be operating for over 18s with one group at a time. You can operate more than one group. That is absolutely fine, but you need to be in very distinct, separate spaces. You can also operate groups that are under and over 18s, and you can have more than one bubble of under and over 18s. But you have to follow the plus 18 rules if you're planning to have a mixed group. So that's one of the challenges. If you've got a group of 15 young people and there's 2 of them are 18 plus, then you have to follow the rules for the whole 18 plus. So the whole group has to be identified as vulnerable. You have to invite them all along to a fixed time and space. They can't drop in. So we just got to be really clear that if you're providing support to an over 18 group or group that includes over 18s, you need to follow the over 18 rules. You can offer back-to-back sessions. You need to clean your venue in between, but the staff can move between different bubbles, different sessions, different groups. You could run 4 or 5 a day if you wanted. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you've got good hand hygiene, cleaning the venues, touch points and things like that, and going through all the usual measures. You can provide more than one session within a day. And if you've got enough space, you could provide 2 or 3 at a time. That's not a problem. But your goal is those young people can't mix at all. You should be trying to keep them in separate bubbles with no crossover. Workers can cross over if they need to for welfare or safeguarding reasons, but ideally they wouldn't, and you're keeping them separate. And you are allowed to, under the 3 tiers, even in the highest tier, to open community and public venues to provide youth services. So youth centres, community halls, church halls, whatever, they're all classed as community spaces, and they can be opened for the provision of providing youth services. Private dwellings cannot and must not be used at any time under any circumstances. You can visit young people and do a home visit. That is acceptable. But you shouldn't enter the home, and that is something that needs to be taken seriously. So just to recap our triage support, this is again for over 18s, because under 18s can just turn up and drop in at any time, but over 18s, because you need to be inviting them to a key session, you can provide that one-to-one triage. So you can say, between these 3 hours on this day, there'll be a youth worker or 2 in the venue, in the park, wherever you are. You can come and see us and have a chat. And you can do that on a one-to-one basis, and you don't have to have that pre-booked or pre-arranged. That's absolutely fine. But the goal of this is to be assessing a young person's needs against whether they should be invited to a group session. Again, this only applies to over 18s. Under 18s, they can just turn up and drop in because you're operating under amber. Detached sessions, this applies across the board really, but youth workers are permitted to be outside and work with groups of young people. Up to 15 ideally is a group, so you can do your work outdoors, you can meet outdoors, you can do, be youth workers walking around the local community, and you might bump into a group of young people outside a supermarket or a set of shops. That's absolutely fine. That's perfectly within the rules. If the young people are meeting in larger groups than 15, our role is to try, we should be trying to educate young people around the new rules. It's complicated. The young people are wearing thin of these new rules, but we've all got our job to do in terms of following them. So our role is to sort of educate those young people, but you can still engage a group of young people if you meet them in the community, absolutely fine. There is separate guidance from the NYA and the Federation of Detached Youth Work, which I will show you a slide in a minute, on our website, which you can access if you need additional information around delivery of detached youth work during COVID. So just a few things to highlight really. Vulnerable young people, all young people under 18, but vulnerable young people over 18 are permitted to travel so that they can attend support groups or sessions. You can also provide transportation for those young people, and it doesn't matter which tier you are in. So if you're in tier 3, you as a worker could travel to a tier 2 area to provide your youth offer. If a young person lives in tier 3, they can equally travel to a tier 2 or tier 1 area if that enables them to access the support they need. So travel is fine for both workers and young people, enabling them to access support and provision. Under amber, for under 18s, trips would be possible. I think we should be looking at the practicality of doing that in terms of where you want to go, but so you could do a trip and visit. I would keep them to a minimum, but it's possible. But over 18s, not at all, unfortunately. Youth and community venues are permitted. I've sort of talked about this. You can open for the provision of providing support for young people under or over 18. That's absolutely fine. Trips and visits are not permitted. Again, this actually applies for over 18s, but you could, under 18s could do a trip or visit. I would keep it to a bare minimum. No residentials and overnights, absolutely, for anybody of any age is acceptable. All sessional planning under our amber needs to be applied under the red period. So you can do all the activities you plan to do across either amber or red. So any age, you can do any of the sports, cooking, singing, all the types of activities you'd like to do, absolutely fine. Just make sure you've got all the right hygiene in place, and we'll pick up on that in a minute. But in terms of whatever level you're in, or whatever age group you're working with, you can do pretty much any activities you wish. Just make sure you're following, the right hygiene rules. Support group sessions should be kept to a minimum. If you don't need to meet, then maybe delay it for a bit until your area changes or the rules change so that over 18s are allowed into more drop-in provision. We move the whole area, the whole youth sector back to amber, but bear with us whilst we continue to work on that. I'm not sure we're going to win that one, because I think the government's really clear that it wants all adults, all over 18s, to follow the same rules, whatever they're doing, and there's logic to that thinking, so bear with us. So we need to make sure you're COVID secure as you go forward. This hasn't changed, so sorry if I keep repeating myself all these webinars, but we need to make sure we've got our action plans in place. This outlines who's got what roles and responsibilities. That action plan is now going to need to be reviewed with the new 3 tiers and the strengthened rules. You're going to need to take a refresh of that, as are you going to need to take a fresh look at your risk assessment. Is it up to date? What do you need to change? If you're working with under and over 18s, you're going to need slightly different rules. You're going to need slightly different risk assessments maybe for those different groups. Think that through. Think of the spaces you're using, how you're going to manage that, particularly if you could have an over 18 group and an under 18 group in the venue at the same time as separate sort of bubbles. How are you going to risk assess that? Think that through quite carefully. Groups and bubbles need to be manageable. They need to be age appropriate. Think about how you're going to cope with that. Again, if you're under 18s and amber, if you're running, I don't know, a special needs group and you've got lots of care workers and lots of volunteers and staff, the goal isn't for that to get to swell to a group of 30 or a group of 20. Try thinking about how you might be able to split that into 2 separate bubbles in the same venue. You can meet at the same time, that's not a problem, but the goal is not to have lots and lots of people in the room at the same time. That's not particularly helpful. Keeping our hand hygiene really robust, lots of sanitizer if you've got it. Hand washing is just as effective, if not more effective. Lots of hand washing on the way in, on the way out, at regular intervals throughout the session, keeping that really clean. Keeping your venue clean is really, really important. Door handles, plug sockets, equipment that we touch all the time needs to be washed and clean, or need to be wiped down and cleaned with soap and water or alcohol in between users, and that's again a really important thing. Door handles is the classic, I think, where lots of people press the door handle to come and go, and if someone's got the bugs, that's the way to share them. So lots of cleaning. It's quite laborious, it's quite dull, but it's really, really important in terms of keeping you and young people safe. Face coverings, these need to be worn by all those over 11 unless they're exempt, at all times, unless they are eating, drinking, or playing sports. So if you're in a social space, young people need to be wearing masks if they're aged 11 or over. They can wear them under 11. There's no rule that says they can't. I know many young people who want to, so that's absolutely fine. You don't have to, but the rule says over 11, and that's their 11th birthday onwards, they must wear a face covering unless they've got a suitable exemption under the rules. Social distancing is still 2 meters ideally, but meter plus if you've got face coverings on. So keep focused on our social distancing. We've got to keep that in check. And for those that are 16 plus, if it's appropriate, get the QR code and use the NHS Test and Trace app. The Test and Trace app will also tell you what your area is based on the GPS in your app. It will tell you what level you're at. It doesn't actually affect our work because the same rules apply to all 3 tiers. So just to any questions or concerns, you can go to the NYA's website. You can go to our COVID guidance webpage, and you will be able to download all the guidance that we're providing once it's republished. So again, the new version 4 of our guidance, the goal is to get that out by 5 p.m. this evening. If we can't achieve that, then we will publish it tomorrow. Keep an eye on our social media channels. Our newsletter will come straight to your inbox the minute it's published as well. Our team, brilliant Laura and Alex, geared up, ready to go when we're ready for it, but we're just waiting on the final sign off from the government's lawyers that the wording we're giving you it complies with the regulations. As soon as we receive that, we will get it published as quick as possible. You will find all the information on our website, as well as the sort of detached youth work guidance. It's all there. Go find it, download it, and have a good read of it. You can also contact us. So if you've got any questions or you're confused, you can email us at guidance@nya.org.uk. So that's guidance, all one word, at nya.org.uk, and our team will get back to you within 48 hours and try and answer your questions as best we can. So we're going to keep pushing this point at all our webinars. We want to remind the whole sector to support young people and our workforce to follow the 3 simple rules of keeping ourselves safe. So washing our hands, covering our face, and making space, keeping that 1 to 2 meters apart, wearing those face coverings, and keeping our hand hygiene really high. These are the best 3 things you can do to keep yourselves and young people safe. And we are really clear that we want the youth sector to remain active and supportive of young people. That can only be done if we are recognised as following the rules, being safe, and supporting young people where we can. So here's a copy of the Fed Detached Youth Work Guidance. We will update this shortly, but it is available on our website. You can download it. It's got key things you need to think of when you're doing work outdoors and on detached youth work with young people. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then finally, the Youth Work Support website, which we developed with UK Youth and other colleagues and organisations, regional youth work units now and others are all supporting this work. A dedicated single point of access where you can access tools, resources, support for all the work you're doing. Go there, find the information you need. There are templates for risk assessments, action plans. There's lots of advice, checklists, all those sorts of things that you will find helpful. And just encourage everyone to keep an eye on that webpage. So I'm going to stop there and just say to everybody, put your questions in the chat on YouTube. Abby is in the background. She will pop up in a second. We will work our way through answering all your questions. So just while you're doing that, put your questions in the chat. Really clear. We've got 2 different sets of sort of requirements. So under 18s are amber, back to as before. Before we were in lockdown. For under 18s, back to as before. For over 18s, essentially it's a continuation of the rules that we've had for the period of the second lockdown period, where we've been in red, with the slight exception of that the groups can now be 15 plus staff, whereas before it was 15 including staff. Otherwise, hopefully not much else has shifted, but there are those 2 different areas. So I'm going to stop the slides and hopefully Abby can come and join me. There she is.
Hiya. Hello, everybody. Thanks for your lots and lots and lots of really useful questions. I think the best way for us to work through them is I'm going to try and group them and we can just discuss them sort of thematically, and hopefully we'll cover everything. Our colleagues Laura and Alex in the background are going to download all of the questions anyway, so we'll make sure that if we don't specifically get to yours and you don't feel it's been covered, we can put some FAQs up on the website that will cover all of those things. So can we start firstly with thinking about the Christmas holidays? So there's been lots of questions around Christmas. Yep. Obviously, the national guidance is changing for that very specific 5-day window. Yep. Some of the questions that we've had related to that are, will there be any changes to our provision to reflect the national change to restrictions, is question 1. In fact, let's just start with that to begin with.
Yeah, so no, so the Christmas additional allowances, if you like, of 3 families within those few days is just so you can celebrate your Christmas, or young people can get together with their families or designated friends in that period. Our provision is not affected in the slightest. You could provide a youth club on Christmas Day if you wanted. You've just got to follow the exact same rules as I've outlined today and is in our document.
Fabulous. So building on that then, we've had a couple of questions related to restrictions and closure. So saying, should people be looking to close prior to that Christmas bubble and after, in a similar way, I think, to those providing education might have done?
Yeah, so I think our sector needs to follow the sort of lead of education. So at the moment, schools will close pretty much as normal. Some areas might close a few days early. If that happens, I would follow that lead. There is no regulatory requirement for us to do anything specific for the youth sector. So we could operate all the way up to Christmas Day. I think that's part of your risk assessment process. Think about who you're working with. Are they vulnerable? Have they got family that could be vulnerable? But that vulnerability may mean actually they're safer coming and engaging with youth work than not. So, Christmas can be a stressful time. End of lockdown can be a stressful time for families. So providing support can be just as vital as ever. And so, there's nothing that we're putting in place as the NYA that's going to say you must or mustn't do anything different over that Christmas period. You don't have to close early, but you might choose to do so if you think, in consultation with parents, young people, that's the thing to do. We're not going to require you to do that.
Fabulous. So some more specific faith-based questions relating to Christmas as a Christian celebration. We've had a couple of questions related to activities that might happen during that period. So there was a question around, are nativity plays permissible with youth groups in churches, and quite a lot of questions related to singing and whether singing is allowed or not.
Yeah, so I think all those things are fine. You just got to keep the social distancing and the hand hygiene up. So a nativity at 2 meters distance is going to be, would be different, an alternative year maybe, but you can do those sorts of activities. It's not a problem. It's just that you need to be maintaining that level of social distancing, hand hygiene, and audience is your problem. You can't have an audience. You can only have those young people in the room. You could broadcast it on Zoom like we're doing, I guess, if you were really clever. But so you're going to have no audience in the venue because you're a youth project. Now the rules for churches and the faith sector might be slightly different, and I would look to Church of England guidance, for example, around they may have different rules for a faith group meeting, but you're meeting for the purpose of coming together as a faith session, not a youth session. If you're coming as part of a youth session and you want to do a nativity, you've got 15 young people in your bubble, you can probably work out the roles, and you get a script, and you could have a really good session, a really good time setting that up. Keep your distance is the key problem, challenge with that, and you can't have an audience there. Churches and things, I think, can have slightly larger audience, groups as a congregation, but then there are slightly different, requirements in terms of what they can do. Singing and things are fine. Just be really cautious that's projecting voice and particles. So really be very spread out, very careful. Maybe use screens and things if you've got them, but there's nothing says you can't go singing.
Thank you. So building on that notion of different types of activities then, Lee, we've had a couple of questions framed in different ways about using different types of activity with young people. So one of the questions related specifically to sports and contact sports, for example. We're saying, well, if we're in a tier 3 area and those things aren't permissible locally, what do we do? So can you elaborate on some of those things, please?
That's fine. So one of the changes with this new version of the tiering system is it's the same rules everywhere. So if you're in tier 3, it's the same rules for all tier 3s. Whereas the first set of tiers that were done before the lockdown, there were local variations and so some areas your gym could open, in other areas it couldn't. The purpose of these new strengthened tiers is that it's the same rules everywhere you go. So you can do all the activities you would typically do as a youth project, and you could do that at tier 3, 2 or 1, that doesn't matter. You shouldn't be finding additional rules or requirements being laid out locally, because the idea is it's all consistent across the country. So as far as we're concerned, the rules apply across all 3 tiers. So there's no different. If you're in tier 1, you have to follow the NYA's guidance, amber for under 18-year-olds, the same as you do at tier 3. There is no difference. You can do the same activities with the same young people in the same way. There's equality there for us as a sector in that space.
Fabulous, thank you. So can we stretch that to think about some of the outdoor activities, please, then, Lee? Yeah. So there's been lots of different questions about outdoor physical activities, so things like rock climbing and that kind of event. What guidance or what information can we give to people about those kind of activities?
Yeah, I mean, do your risk assessments. Consider how you might transfer the virus between participants. So, rock climbing would be fine, but hand grips probably need to be washed down or cleaned between users, because that's one of the challenges. Or do you wear gloves that are then disposable? Really difficult with rock climbing. I'm not a rock climber myself, but been around a fair few, and I've had a few clung walls in my time in youth centres I've run. So, but you need to be thinking that really through. If you're doing activities, we've said before, basketball, the problem with that is one person holds it, throws it to somebody else. If they've got the virus on their hands because they've got, picked it up on the way, then they pass to somebody else who's now got it on their hands, and it goes around the group really quickly, and that's the thing you're trying to avoid. So, if everyone's doing a penalty shootout, they've all got their own clean ball, then that's not a problem, but they've all got to have their own ball. So we've got to think that through. So climbing, all those gymnastics, all sorts of activities are not a problem. We just got to be really, really rigorous in the cleaning of the equipment and the tools that we use in between, users. So the same goes, I've talked before about cooking. Young people can cook. That is not a problem. But actually, if you've got a frying pan and a ladle and we're all frying bacon, and then 3 different young people all take it in turns to toss the bacon around, or make pancakes might be a better option. We're all making pancakes and 3 different young people want to make a pancake. You need to wash down the handle and the spatula before the next young person picks it up, because that's the classic way of transferring the virus between people.
Okay, thank you. Can we stretch that to the notion of outdoor and detached then, while we're thinking about being outside? So one of the questions that's come up lots of times in the chat is this notion of the rule of 6, and how applicable is that if we're doing detached or outreach provision?
Yeah, so the rule of 6 is an interesting one. So in tier 1, the rule of 6 would apply for over 18s. So you could, but also actually our youth project and that's drop-in. So the rule of 6, you can randomly meet up with a group of 6 people. That's fine. But our guidance actually is much more flexible than that. So for under 18s, you can drop in indoors, whether you're in a youth centre or a village hall or you're out in a park, it doesn't matter. It's the same rules apply. So you can be in the park and 15 young people can come along and you can put them in a group, in a bubble under 18, and you can work with them. You could arrange to meet with a support group of over 18s in the local park, but you have to invite them to meet you at that time and space. That's the challenge with over 18s versus under 18s. But what you can do is no different, and the rules around grouping and staff is exactly the same whether you're indoors or outdoors. It doesn't change. The quirk is the rule of 6 is permitted outdoors as a random drop-in for over 18s at tier 1. Technically that's true, but we've come to the conclusion that very few over 18s would drop in randomly. So you normally have larger groups of young people who want to drop in. So it's been safer to stick with the rule of the bubble, the sort of support groups of 15. Sorry, let's get too many groups.
So many numbers floating around, isn't there?
And it's happening at speed.
Yeah, and clarity on everything will always be in the guidance, and there's always the guidance inbox. So if you want to double check anything, you can always just send us an email post this webinar. So just extending that notion of different group sizes and activities and places, there's been quite a few questions about where this work can take place. So if I can be really specific about that, Lee, you talked about community buildings being able to open to provide activities, youth service activities. So we've had quite a few questions about leisure centre venues, and different types of venues is one part of that. And the second part is there's been some questions about private dwellings and whether we're allowed to meet vulnerable young people or groups of young people in a private dwelling. So can we have some clarity on both of those, please?
Yeah, that's fine. So the regulations have given a youth sector a specific exemption around community centres. And a community centre is a village hall, a scout hut, a youth centre, and that's kind of very, very, very clear. Those venues can open for the purposes of providing youth clubs, youth projects, youth activities. You can use other venues if they're allowed to be open, but you'll have to check with the venue that you want to use. So if leisure centres are reopening, where there are maybe slightly different rules depending on the tiers on that venue. The youth guidance has not gone into the depth and details of all the different types of potential venues. We've stuck with our kind of core youth centres, scout hut, brownie huts, all those sorts of things, and what can we do? But you can look at the rules. So I would say, if you want to work in if you want to do a session in a local leisure centre, give them a call, speak to the manager. They will know exactly what they're allowed to do or not allowing you to do, and they will tell you. I know my local leisure centre is reopening, but actually there's going to be no classes, so you can't turn up and be in a. So you could book a tennis court and play tennis, but you couldn't go to a Zumba class. So there might be different, you might be able to go into those sorts of venues, but they may have different requirements of what you can and can't do when you're there. Private dwellings, are just simply kind of not to be used. There are, in terms of providing a sort of group session, not at all. Over or under 18, not on. There are, I know there's some youth work, really targeted specialist youth work maybe that works with young people. Maybe, I don't know, stuff I've seen in the past where young people really have huge levels of anxiety, may not be able to come and access a youth club or a project, but need our support. You could go to the home, but you shouldn't enter it. So you could meet them you could meet them outside, you could meet them in their garden, you could support those young people, but you shouldn't be entering that home. It gets really difficult when it's getting cold and wet, and we understand that. But so the delivery of any sort of group activity, not in a private dwelling whatsoever, you could go to a young person's individual home as a professional practitioner to provide support to them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. There's been quite a few questions related to staffing and volunteering and some of the challenge there. So if we could just kind of pick up on some of those points. Lots of people were raising the issue of some of their young people potentially being 18 or over that are operating as peer leaders or volunteers with a younger youth group. So a bit of clarity around where they would sit.
Okay, let's pick that up quick. So in that circumstances, as long as you've registered them as a volunteer, so they might be a young person, but if you've registered them as a recognised volunteer within your project or organisation, then you can class them as a member of staff. So if you've got an 18, 19-year-old who volunteers on a junior club of 8 and 9, 10-year-olds, then they're there to be a member of staff. They're there to be a junior leader. Treat them as a member of staff. That's absolutely fine. So that's that. You can certainly do that. But you must just register them, and I don't have to think you have to overthink that. But they can't just rock up and turn up. If somebody says, "Why are they here?" you need to be able to go, "Oh, because they're a junior leader and they filled in this junior leadership registration sheet." It doesn't need to say a great deal of detail, but you just need some form of process that says, "We recognise you as a junior leader or a young member of staff, and they are therefore a volunteer member of staff."
Extending that to the notion of training volunteers then, Lee, that would include training a group of young people at 18 to be a volunteer?
Yeah, and that's fine as well. So you can bring those groups of young people together for training. If you're training a group of junior leaders, then you've probably got to stick to your bubbles of 15 sizes. There is an interesting one that actually, if you wanted to get a team of 30 volunteers together, you've got a big scout group, you've got 30 volunteers, and you wanted to all do a training session, you're actually allowed to do that. You can bring staff together, and that's volunteered, paid or otherwise is irrelevant. So you can bring staff together in larger than 15 for the purposes of training and development or a meeting. And that's because that's classed by the law as work. So you can go to work and be surrounded by as many people as like. You can go into an office block and there could be 200 people in that office block. They're not put into bubbles of 15 in the office block. So you can bring your workforce together. You could bring your volunteers together for the purposes of training or a team meeting. You should keep that to the minimum amount of time possible. It only needs to be an hour long. Keep it to an hour. Then everyone disperses. But you can bring your staff together for that purpose. And there's no size limit on how big that could be. You just need to make sure you've got your risk assessment and you're being super responsible. Thank you.
Lee, along with that, there was a question about generic guidance to support staff or challenges with staff. Is there anything that you could advise there?
Is there any examples they've given?
No, I think it's with relation to volunteers and staff, and some of the questions. I'm assuming it's some of the questions that we had quite early about how to manage things like if you've got staff that might be vulnerable or shielding or need additional emotional support, for example.
Yeah. So the guidance document that we've got has always talked about recognising vulnerable and extremely vulnerable individuals, staff or young people. There are checklists on the Youth Work Support website I talked about. There are some really helpful checklists that have been provided by our trade union colleagues. So, worth going and having a look at some of those tools to download. Essentially, look, we're all humans. It's about talking to people and having understanding what is the anxiety, what is the concern. And actually, if someone's extremely vulnerable and therefore coming to work or volunteering is too great a risk, but then you need to find suitable alternative ways of managing that. Talk to your HR department. If you're a group of amazing volunteers, talk amongst yourselves, make your judgment. I say this every time we do one of these webinars. The NYA is not compelling anyone to do anything you don't want to do. So we're not saying, here's our guidance, you must open, you must keep going, you must do this. We're saying, if you wish to open, these are the rules, this is how you do it safely. Especially if you've got a team of volunteers or team of staff, and you're not, or not enough staff, because you've got enough staff, say there's 5 of you, but 3 of you feel you're vulnerable, you've got family members who you live with who might be more vulnerable, well then actually you can't open with just 2, so you have to close, and that is the decision, and that's we'll back you all the way with that. We're just saying, if you choose to open, this is how you can do it, and this is what you need to put in place. But no one's requiring you to do that. So actually, if your staff, if your young people, if your parents don't feel that it's the responsible, safe thing to do, then don't do it. Stay closed. That's a shame, but it's perfectly reasonable.
And you can always diversify the ways you engage with young people. Maybe look at some of the online practices. There's different ways around it. But okay, Lee, we've got time for a couple more questions. One of the questions, or one of the themes that's coming through, is this notion of mixed age group bubbles. Now, there's 2 separate strands to this question. There was a couple of questions that related to what I'm assuming is youth work delivered in a formal education environment, because it related to year 13, year 10, etc. So what would be the rules to follow, just for clarity, if you are working with a group of young people who some are under 18 and some are over, and would that be different if you were delivering work within a school environment?
So I'll pick that point up first. So if you're operating in a school or a college, you follow the rules in terms of group sizes and ages of the school or college. And the schools and colleges have been given very clear advice, I think, getting better anyway, from the government around what they need to be doing. So schools got much larger bubble sizes, they can have mixed group sizes, but they're not mixing years as such, so you've got to be, just be mindful of that. But talk to the institution, the school, whoever you work with, the college, the university maybe, and they will advise you what they're allowing you to do. And you've got to follow that fundamentally, first and foremost. So the broader issue of, and I've done this before, so I ran an LGBT project, and I had some 16-year-olds and I had some 19-year-olds. There was a mixed group of young people providing peer support, and this was now divided down the middle of some in amber and some in red. Really straightforward. If you've got a mixed group like that, you need to follow the red rules. So if you're going to have anybody who's over 18, you follow the rules for red. Now, that does risk, actually, if most of your young people are under 18 and you've got 1 or 2 who are over 18, you can find yourself saying, well, we'll follow the amber rules and we'll exclude the over 18s. So be the responsible provider, and don't, try not to do that, and try to find a way of incorporating all young people who need that support. But if you're working with a group of young people that's mixed, as you've got under and over 18s, it needs to become a support group, invite, invitation to a date and time. And that's really straightforward, hopefully.
Extending that, there's some questions about people that work with family bubbles, or delivering like triple P work with families, etc. Where would that fit?
So again, you're working with a vulnerable family or a vulnerable group of individuals, so you're in your support group space. So because you recognise them as vulnerable, which is why they've been referred to you, you're supporting them, you need to operate within the red rules of over 18. So, you can still do all the same activities, you can still do all the same things, you just got to be date and time, invitation only, and within that group of 15 plus staff now, and I'll keep stating that, it's a group of 15 plus staff at red.
And would the same apply, Lee, for young people who have SEND or additional needs? Is there an age exemption, or are they still over 18s is red, under 18s amber?
Yeah, I guess this is one of my frustrations with the current, is that it's a guillotine. It's your age. It's not even your developmental age, it's your physical age that defines this. So yes, you could be SEND up to 25 or 40, and they might all have a sort of developmental age of a similar age. It's not relevant to the regulations. The regulations do not, at this point, provide differentiation about that. It's very clear. If you're over 18, it's this. If it's under 18, it's that. We continue to press. We will continue to push for further relaxation. You're probably seeing in the media, there are a lot of MPs hot under the collar and not happy about these new tiers. Things are already started to shift. I think that's one of the challenges the lawyers are having in terms of approving our wording. So I don't think it's not going to change what we're telling you today in terms of what you're going to need to do in the next few weeks, but maybe in the new year we'll have another opportunity to go back and say, hang on a minute, what about this, this and this? Can you make additional exemptions?
Thank you, Lee. A couple of additional questions then. One about the numbers of bubbles that you would be eligible to have in a building.
Yeah, so down to the amount of space you've got. If you've got a massive building with lots of different rooms, you could have different bubbles in those rooms. Under 18s, they can use the same toilets and kitchens, and you've got to make sure there's good hygiene and cleaning going on. Over 18, they need a separate set of toilets, etc., per group. So think that through in terms of your logistics of your space. But I mean, there are some, My Place, massive venues around the country. They've got lots of rooms upstairs, downstairs, different sets of toilets. You can then operate more than one group. But you need to have them in a distinct bubble, in a distinct space.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had quite a lot of questions about transporting young people in cars or in minibuses. Is it allowed, isn't it? How many young people might be allowed in a vehicle at one time? Do we have any clarity on those, please?
Yeah, so there's stuff in our guidance about transport, so do take a read of that. You can transport young people in a car, in a minibus. Public transport is all fine. Again, follow the basics of face coverings for all. And I think, although the legislation is under 11s wouldn't need a face covering whilst being transported. Best practice, they would wear one if they can. I mean, it depends if they're really young, maybe not, but aiming to be wearing a face covering, lots of hand gel, all facing the same way. So if you're coughing or you're breathing, you're going that way and not looking at each other. Try and think those things through. I don't think there's a need for empty spaces in between people, but that would be best practice. And if you can transport people with a gap or spare seats, then you should. The rules don't require it, but that would be really good practice, I think. But you can use cars and things like that. That's not a problem. It's really important. The young people need our support. They need to be able to get to us and they need to get home safely. So we've got that we're weighing up those risks between the risk of the virus spreading and the risk of not providing that support. So actually, if putting them in a minibus with face coverings on and they've all washed, we'll give them a squirt of hand gel as they get in, then, we're being responsible in terms of making sure that we're trying to minimize the spread of the virus, but also making sure these young people get our help, get access to us, get that opportunity to have that conversation with their trusted adult. Because we know from so many case studies that we've seen that, for a frightening number of young people, your project, your provision might be the only time they feel safe in a week. It might be the only time they get properly fed. We know how critical the youth sector is, and we're making that argument all the time to government. So, it's really important that you're there for them, but safely.
Yeah, I think that links to the next couple of points, really. There's asks for additional clarity around things like singing and contact sport and various different things. The key point is exactly the one that you made, isn't it, Lee, about actually, is delivering that activity really the safest way for us to still provide support to young people? Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of prompt people with around those questions? Sports, singing?
Yeah, all those things are possible. But again, I think you've just asked the question, really. Is there another methodology of achieving the same outcome, the same goal with lower risk? So you could do rugby. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But actually, that's a lot of people piling in on stuff with each other, getting into a scrum. Probably not the greatest, the safest way of not spreading a virus. But could you achieve the same goals of whatever you're trying to achieve with that game or that activity in another way? It was a slightly more social distance function in a different space, in a different, delivery, and be thinking that stuff through. So, I can achieve good, if I'm trying to educate young people around healthy eating, well, there are different ways. I can pile them all in the kitchen and we could cook up a meal, or I could give them a box with their own ingredients in it that they then make a baguette or something on their own, and you could still get them food, you can talk them through the same learning, the same developmental points, but in a safer function. So just think through the activities you're trying to do and break that down. The key is your risk assessment, and the risk is the virus versus what you're planning to do. And if there's a safer way of doing it, you should, because that's the moral thing to do, and it's the kind of sensible route that we should be taking. But actually, if the only way to achieve this, life-changing goal is to do this one thing that way, well then, weigh up that risk. And if between you, that young person and their guardian, maybe you've come to the conclusion that's the thing to do, then you can do it. Fortunately, residentials, overnight stays are not allowed and will not be allowed for quite some time.
Thank you, Lee. A really key question that's come up that I'm glad we've got time to squeeze in is, when does this happen? 1 minute past midnight on Wednesday or 1 minute past midnight on Thursday?
Yeah, so my understanding is it's Wednesday. 1 minute past midnight Wednesday morning, you follow these new rules. Yeah, it is a bit unclear, but everyone else, all the shops are opening on Wednesday, so it's 1 minute past midnight on Wednesday.
Thank you. Lee, we've had quite a few questions from groups that would potentially not necessarily be delivering youth activity, as in youth work. So groups that represent much younger children or community development or community support. Can you signpost a little bit there, please?
Sure. So it depends on your types of activity. So if you're providing like an after-school club or some more educational developed provision, early years provision, then there is additional guidance provided by the Department for Education. It's called the Out of School Settings Guidance, and you can go onto the gov.uk, Google Out of School Settings, and you can download that. Our guidance and their guidance are very, 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 very similar. I have to tell you, there's almost nothing in it. So what we're allowing you to do is exactly what they're allowing. Otherwise, there's no point us having two separate sets of guidance. But what we do is put it into the context of the youth sector. So I know on our email box, we've had questions. I run a youth orchestra, it's a youth project, it's a youth activity. You follow our guidance. We've also had some other examples. Can't for the life of me think of one right now, where we had a local football club, run a junior football group, and actually those young people are turning up to play football as part of a local football club. You follow the FA's guidance around community football. Our guidance is for community youth activities, which is a very broad church. It covers all manner of activities, all types of stuff, and therefore our guidance will never be able to capture all the richness of our amazing sector, which is why we provide these webinars. You get to ask questions, and you can use that guidance at nya.org.uk email address, and we will provide you with support. Just a plug, shameless plug, but we're running another one of these webinars on Wednesday at 11 o'clock with UK Youth. So if you want another opportunity to ask questions, Anna and the team will be with me on Wednesday, 11 o'clock. Go to UK Youth's newsletters and website, and you can register there. But it's exactly the same slides, pretty much, and it'll be just the same thing, but just another opportunity to hear it again.
We've got a minute. Can I squeeze in another 2 questions? Okay, question. Face masks, inside, outside?
Yeah, so I think best practice is both, but indoors definitely, outdoors not required. It's not essential, but good practice. Depends how close you are. If you're outside and spread out, then no, they're not needed. If you're outside and really huddled in, then you're going to then worth having. So we've had some examples of mobile provision where we've got a gazebo and we get it's got walls on it, and we're all yes, you're outdoors, but you're effectively in a enclosed space. Face coverings outdoors would make lots of sense there. Inside, 11 and over should be wearing a face covering. Face shields, those sort of plastic visors, they do count, but they're just very poor at protecting you. So you can wear them, but they're just not as good.
Final question then, trips. Are we allowed to take our groups of young people to places?
Yeah, so if you're under 18 and amber, yes, you can, because you're back under the amber rules and we could do trips before lockdown. Over 18s and in red, no, you can't. And if you've got a mixed group, you can't, because the over 18 rules apply there as well. Residentials for all ages, completely excluded. Overnight stops, not allowed. But day trips under 18, yes. Okay.
Thank you. Our time's up, I'm afraid. I think we've covered most of the questions. Anything that you haven't felt has been answered, feel free to drop us and read through the guidance first, make sure it's not answered in there, and if not, ping us an email to the guidance inbox, and we'll see if we can get you the information that you need.
Yeah. So just to recap for colleagues, the new rules we're pretty familiar with both sets of rules. For under 18s, we're at pre-lockdown amber. For over 18s, we're in the current situation with red, where just slightly different around who you can invite and who can come along naturally. So just keep an eye on that. The new guidance document will drop hopefully by 5 p.m. today. As soon as we get off this, we'll jump on the emails and see what's come back, and then we've got to just get it posted. But we aim to get the new red version of the guidance out, version 4, by 5 p.m. today. If it's not there, it will be tomorrow, and we'll publish it as soon as we can. Register for the NYA network, sign up to our Twitter. While you're on YouTube, click on that subscribe button, because you'll get lots of, there's lots of other videos and useful stuff on our YouTube channel. But also, when we will now get into the pattern when we do webinars around this stuff, we will do it through YouTube. So if you click the bell icon and all the usual things they tell you on YouTube videos, I'm not a YouTuber, but you will get the automatic updates, and they will let you know what to do. So click on subscribe, and you'll always be up to date with our webinars. Thanks very much. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.